October 3rd, 1993, Mogadishu, Somalia. The air was thick with heat and gunpowder and the smell of burning tires, and black columns of smoke climbed into the sun and twisted over Mogadishu. From 1,000 feet up, the streets looked rabid, technicals ripping through intersections, clans boiling into alleys, tracers arcing up like angry fireflies into the sky, and Super 61, lifting off, the voice says, over comms, calm and steady. Major Cliff Wolcott and Chief Warrant Officer Donovan Briley, both seasoned veterans, slide the collective up on their UH-60 Black Hawk, Super 61, as the rotors scissor the air, composite blades flashing in the glare of the Somali sun. The plan goes clean, involving a fast rope-in, bagging the target, and getting out, because Delta and the Rangers are a well-oiled machine, with each man a cog in something delicate and deadly. However, Mogadishu has its own rhythm, and the city is a hostile, twitching thing that spits gunfire. The RPGs were perched on rooftops like patient snakes, and Super 61, be advised, you have fire from the northeast, the AWACS crackled, to which Wolcott replied, copy, dropping the nose of his aircraft and knifing left while the tracers stitched across the horizon, and armor plates caught the bullets, pinging and pinging, as the countermeasures wound up like angry ghosts. The Black Hawk shuddered, threading the rooftops, with 50 feet between the top of the blades and the concrete, and in back, Crew Chief Staff Sergeant Bill Cleveland bellowed over the chaos. Tails clear, you're good, as he clutched his M134 minigun and punched a red arc of 7.62 into an upper floor. Then it happens, a hollow, gut-punch thunk, the sound every pilot prays he never hears, because an RPG tears into the tail, slices through hydraulics, and spews shrapnel through the bay, causing the panel to erupt like a Christmas tree. Wolcott battles the stick, boots fused to the pedals, hands unwilling to give up on the bird, while hydraulics 1 is gone, Briley yelps, and switching to 2, as the hawk bucks and dips, but through some obstinate miracle, stays upright, because redundant systems sink their teeth into the machine and keep her airborne when any other machine would have given up the ghost. Consequently, the deck shudders under their boots, but she's still flying, and smoke gathers in the cockpit, hot and acrid, as the right gunner continues to rake the street, trying to keep heads down, while Wolcott nurses the crippled bird towards an open square. Metal screams, and the tail thrums like it wants to shake itself free as Mayday, Mayday, Super 61 hit, going down southeast of target, and Roger. Super 61, company inbound, hold on, because the city rises up like a fist. The rotors shriek, and one final pull on the collective matches her heartbeats with the rotor beats, and the world tilts, resulting in impact, dust, and then a silence that rings. Although the Black Hawk somehow holds, with no fireball and no disintegration. The carbon composite blades, ripped to shreds but still there, soak up the impact of the fall, and the fuselage cracks open, but the cockpit is a shell, a thin steel sanctum of chance. Therefore, Delta sprints into the crash site, and Super 61 smokes, its wing broken, but its heart refuses to quit. They'll dance around the wreckage for hours, a final stand written in smoke and brass. And when the shooting finally dies down, the story that endures is that of a helicopter that wouldn't die, saving lives even when its own had been spent. Thus the lesson continues to echo through hangars and classrooms and pre-flight briefs. Don't just build for the fight, build for the moment after, when survival no longer makes sense and happens anyway. Night has fallen on Mogadishu, but the city is afire, a blazing constellation that has been dragged to earth, and the air tastes of iron and smoke. Around the twisted wreckage of Super 61, the surviving Rangers and Delta operators paw at the dirt with bleeding hands, throwing up a hasty ring of defense, while gunfire snaps from every direction. A constant, jagged chorus. Hundreds of militiamen are closing in on their position through the darkness. But even under that hail of bullets, the helicopter is more than a wrecked machine. It is a fortress, and the crumpled fuselage swallows rounds. The mangled tail becomes a shield, and inside, the intercom hacks out weak static, the auxiliary battery growling like a dying heart that won't quit. Therefore, Earl Fillmore yanks a wounded ranger behind the torn bulkhead and jams him into cover. The Hawk held, he gasps, half-awed. It just kept us alive, because the UH-60 wins its legend not in clean flight, but in the wreckage of the fall. While concrete walls chip and cave under sustained fire, the carbon skin panels and Kevlar seats hold fast, protecting anyone with the balls to curl up behind them, and the redundancies that kept it airborne become armor in death. Hours crawl past. Consequently, the reinforcements burst through the city's bottlenecks, and in the first pale light of dawn, the remains of Super 61 are hoisted into the air on a sling, a tattered American flag thrown over the wreckage. In the hangars of Fort Bragg and Fort Campbell, engineers and crew chiefs hover over every panel, every cracked strut and soot-blackened seam, and they discover something remarkable, because the burn marks are fingerprints of resilience. The composite rotor blades, riddled with hits, didn't break like metal used to, but they delaminated, peeling in layers to bleed off the impact, which wasn't luck, but design, since Sikorsky's engineers had dreamed this kind of punishment up and built for it, built for war not in perfection, but in chaos. The cost in Mogadishu was heavy. However, the way the Hawk had survived, RPG strikes, small arms swarms, hydraulics gone to zero, would change doctrine. Therefore, manuals were rewritten and maintenance routines shifted. Aircrews learned to trust that even when the airframe screamed and the cockpit lit up like a casino, the Hawk would still carry them home. And that trust would echo 17 years later across the bare ridgelines of Afghanistan, when another crew pulled pitch into thin mountain air, counting on the same stubborn heart to get them out alive. The sun sets behind the saw-toothed ridges of the Hindu Kush, and the world is silver and cold, moonlight splashed on far-off snowcaps, and two UH-60 Black Hawks from the 101st Airborne follow the talc-dry riverbeds, dark shapes skimming across rock and scrub. Infantry huddle in the back, preparing themselves for a night insertion near the Korengal. The Valley of Death, as the veterans say, half a joke, half a prayer. Because at this point, the gravity of the situation is all too real. At the controls, Chief Warrant Officer Miles Harrigan tightens his grip on the cyclic, and with 6 years in the Hawk, he trusts the machine more than he trusts gravity. The crew chief crackles over comms, trying to keep it light, saying, "Hydraulics check, bet it's running smooth," and it is. The twin T-700S hummed like caged animals, and JP-8 tainted air wheezed through the vents, battling the needle-cold wind that seeped through every seam, while they banked north towards the extraction zone. A thin white spear leapt from the darkness, and RPG, left side, was shouted as the impact slammed into the fuselage just under the main rotor disc, and the Hawk shuddered as if punched by a god. The cabin erupted in red. Hydraulic pressure, engine 2 oil temp, and stabilator fail, and Harrigan's heart jackhammers against the vest. Therefore he barks, "Strap in! We're not dead yet," while pushing the cyclic forward. One engine is bleeding out, half the flight controls, losing pressure any other bird would begin to roll, but the Hawk stumbles and wobbles, yet maintains a razor of altitude because it is designed to endure. The crew chief leans into the door gun, the M240 barking into the dark, and says, "Transmission fluid everywhere, sir. We're painting the night with it. Up front, Lieutenant." Rivera doesn't flinch, and his words are muscle memory, a hand-me-down from a different war in a different city, as he says, "Feet on the pedals, keep her honest." Switching to hydraulic system 2. The ghost of Mogadishu rides shotgun, and they tow for the dry riverbed. Flames licking from the left engine cowling, while Harrigan's hands dance through the checklist he doesn't need to read, and he takes action, cut fuel, cross-feed power, and counter-torque. The Hawk grumbles and groans, metallic objections to the force applied, but it responds, because that's the thing about Hawks. They don't get the vapors, no matter how hard you abuse them. The ground comes up, faster and faster, until it's just a blur, and then the two meet, with a crunch, not a kiss, and it isn't lovely, it isn't smooth, it isn't graceful, but it's just a hard, violent, ugly, miraculous landing. The back doors burst open, and the soldiers pour out, rifles up, formation snapping taut in the blowing dust, while the Hawk comes to rest on her knees, coughing smoke, blades ticking down like a tired heartbeat. Harrigan sits there, breath fogging the cracked visor, ears ringing, and he looks over at Rivera, and the grin is already there, because he says, "Same story," and then adds, "Different war." And this is because, ever since Mogadishu, every crewman carries the same quiet certainty. The Black Hawk doesn't just fly, it endures. And on nights like this, that's the difference between a headline and a homecoming. The hangar at Bagram is all tired metal and dogged pride, and the hydraulic pumps exhaled, and the tools clattered as the voices tried to find the perfect balance between exhausted and awed. Center Bay, what was left of Harrigan's UH-60, sat like a charred silhouette under the hum of fluorescent lights, and the techs huddled around her like surgeons around a living legend. The first tech said, took an RPG right under the hub, his gloved fingers tracing a ragged seam of alloy and soot, still auto-rotated without losing the tail, and the younger tech beside him shook his head, his eyes wide, saying, "That's not a helicopter," he said. "That's a tank with wings, because word travels fast." Photos of the wreck end up taped to bulletin boards from Kandahar to Ramstein, and stateside, Sikorsky and the Army's engineering teams pull telemetry and flight recorder logs. Numbers scraped from the flight computer, like truth from bone, which tell an even braver story than memory does. Redundancies, kicking in exactly when they should, composite structures taking loads they were never meant to, feedback loops balancing chaos long enough to keep people alive. The Hawk was never built to be pretty, but those sharp edges and boxy lines hide a design philosophy paid for in blood, because two T-700 engines feed a transmission that can carry the whole aircraft even if one engine quits, and control paths are doubled, twin hydraulic circuits that can run on their own or cross-feed when damage chews through a line. On older birds, a blast of bullets could turn steel rotors into flying guillotines, but the Black Hawk's carbon fibre blades flex when hit, and they don't explode, they delaminate, peeling in layers to bleed off energy instead of failing all at once, which is why one blade can take an RPG's near miss and still make lift long enough to get boots on the ground and souls home. Captain Elena Varela, an aviation engineer with the 160th, runs her fingertips over a recovered rotor from Kunar, saying, "See this?" to the circle of techs. Delamination across 40% of the cord, but the neutral axis held. This blade chose to live. And a few chuckles, nervous and grateful, follow, because nobody argues, as that's the mindset embedded into the airframe. Survivability isn't perfection, it's forgiveness. Therefore, the Hawk will limp home with half its guts hanging out, when its predecessors would have demanded clean air and clean checklists. And it bends. It howls. It fights. It does not give up easy. Consequently, in the schoolhouses, instructors drive the point home. Keep it level and it'll bring you home. And they show grainy footage from Mogadishu, followed by sharp helmet cam footage from Kunar, which demonstrate the same theme. Men alive because the machine refused to quit. Chief Warrant Officer Ken Hester tells a room full of new pilots, "You don't fly a Black Hawk, you partner with one, you respect her, and she'll fight with you until the rotors stop." And throughout the mid-2000s and beyond, the UH-60 becomes more than a workhorse. It's a lifeline, a rescue bird, a medevac angel, an assault spearhead, and crews name them. Paint small saints and lucky charms on the nose, which may be called superstition, but they've earned it. One medevac pilot, Dustoff 73, swears his Hawk could smell danger before he did, and he brought her back from Helmand with half a blade missing, the stabilator jammed, hydraulics bleeding to nothing. And when they landed, the fuselage was cracked in 2 places. Yet the crew walked away because you could feel her fighting gravity, he said later, every inch of the way. And this isn't myth-making, as Mogadishu started it and Kunar proved it, proving that the UH-60 can take punishment no other aircraft can even dream of. And that design can braid resilience straight into the bones of a machine. Behind every heroic landing, beneath the scars and the carbon burn, is the quiet hum of engineers, wrench-turners, and believers who decided survival could be built, not begged. And when the Kunar wreck finally gets craned onto a flatbed for shipment stateside, Harrigan stands on the tarmac watching, with dust on his boots and smoke still in his clothes. The crew chief beside him spits grit and shakes his head, saying, "Sir, she didn't owe us that landing." And Harrigan smiles, saying, "No, but she gave it anyway." Which is the spirit that lives on, because from Somalia's burning streets to Afghanistan's cold valleys, the Black Hawk keeps demonstrating that same old truth, that machines, like men, can have heart, and it won't be the last time a UH-60 will take fire or survive it. A little after dawn, the first flight line lights crackle to life at Fob Sharana, and frost still clings to the hawks on the pad, black silhouettes against a pink and brittle horizon. Among them Ghost Rider 12, a UH-60M, newer, sleeker, but holding the same battle-hardened soul that's flown through decades of war. Crew Chief Sergeant Aaron Mills starts his walk-around, tapping each rotor with a gloved knuckle, listening for that low, living hum that only the crews recognize. And he mutters, "She's still singing." In the cockpit, Captain Dana Rhodes flips the masters, and the MFDs light the glass with a soft green glow, because the tasking is a medevac into a contested valley with an ambushed patrol, narrow approach, crossfire on both sides, 7,000 feet, and nasty tailwinds, which Rhodes knows. And she also knows that the Black Hawk gives odds about as much as it gives a shit. The rotors claw the thin mountain air, digging for altitude, while over the intercom, Mills's voice says, "Hydraulic pressures are steady, no vib spikes," and Rhodes gives a wicked smirk, saying, "Let's keep it that way." 10 minutes out, the radio crackles, and a voice says, "Ghost Rider 12. This is Alamo. You have multiple insurgents in the vicinity of the LZ, possible man-pads in the area, which causes Mills's hand to tighten around the buckles of his harness, and the door gunner slews the M240 toward the ridgeline, searching for threats while they drop into the valley, and the world explodes because rounds are hammering the fuselage, sparks skittering along armor as a tracer kisses a panel, screens flicker and the airframe shudders. Engine 1 pressure dropping. Rivera barks from the left seat, and Rhodes snaps back, crossfeed to 2. thereby allowing the Hawk to take the hit, lurch, and catch herself. Although the left fuel line erupts into vapour, but the containment system clamps down before flame can find it. Rhodes keeps the nose low, shouldering the bird through rock cuts and dirty winds, hands working terrain, torque, wind, all feel and muscle memory, while Mills and the gunner rake the ridge to buy seconds, and smoke pops below, because Marines wave them in, and there is nothing elegant about this touchdown. Since the ship hits the earth hard, the suspension groaning, but steady, and the ramp drops, allowing the wounded to be brought in, their blood mixing with the hydraulic sheen on the deck, which is a scene of practiced chaos, with no words, and they are climbing when the second RPG streaks past the ship, too close, thereby causing the blast to rip the rear stabilator, and the tail kicks, and the Hawk yaws, and for a heartbeat gravity tries to win. However, Angel 24 slides overhead, calling support, and Rhodes keeps her voice level, whispering into the mic, "Hold together, girl," which prompts the Hawk to answer with a deep, stubborn vibration like a promise. And Rhodes eases pitch, pins 300 feet, and shoves west on one good engine and wheel. Consequently, they manage to stay aloft, and 20 minutes later, they slam back onto the pad at Sharana, where the hydraulics are whining, and smoke is curling out of the stabilator, and the medics are pulling the wounded, and the maintainers are swarming the bird. Mills climbs out last, limping, his eyes blown wide, and says, "Ma'am, we should have fallen out of the sky." But Rhodes looks at the scorched fuselage, at the bullet tracks, at the stubborn machine that refused to quit, and she answers, "She didn't let us." Back home, after the rotors stop, aircraft like this one are opened up and read like scripture, because Sikorsky engineers call them survivors by design, although soldiers call them something else, angels with teeth, and every scar tells a story. Composite blades that soaked up shrapnel instead of shattering, armour that took 7 hits before it bent, a hydraulic loop that bought 7 more minutes of life, and each field fix becomes another layer in the Hawk's legend, which has led to UH-60 seconds flying for more than 24 nations by the 2020 seconds. In jungles, deserts, tundra, for rescues, fires, insertions. What makes a Black Hawk is not something that can be easily explained, because when you ask a pilot, he won't cite the specs, but will speak of feel, trust, that feeling when the cockpit goes red and the alarms sing, and somehow you still feel lift, which is a feeling that deep down, you know, she quits before you do. And this is a notion that Major Miles Harrigan, US Army retired, summed up a long time ago, saying, "People don't think a machine can have spirit, but when you're falling out of the sky over enemy country and the bird levels herself out, you tend to stop arguing the point," thereby highlighting the fact that from the fiery streets of Mogadishu to the icy valleys of Afghanistan, from the first hesitant whine of a starting hydraulic system to the last lazy tick of a winding rotor, the UH-60 became more than a helicopter. It became a promise, and when hell owns the sky, this machine will still find a way to bring its people home. The helicopter that refused to die didn't just redefine the term survivable, but also redefined the term loyal, and somewhere under the steady hum of fluorescent lighting in a quiet hangar, a crew chief runs a gloved hand along the scarred edge of a rotor, listening for that faint, persistent music still thrumming through carbon and steel, and he smiles, saying to no one in particular, "She's still singing."